In example 1c, we are given the expression 1 over 1 minus the cosine of v plus 1 over 1 plus the cosine of v, and asked to rewrite this expression as a single quotient, okay? So all that means is, remember, quotient means division. We are going to do the addition here. We're adding these two fractions, but we're going to combine everything into one fraction. Okay, so we're going to write combine into one fraction. Okay, so I'm kind of out of room here, so I'm going to jump to the next page and start working this on the next page. Okay, all right, again, this is an expression. There is no equal sign, so you cannot do something like add something to both sides or manipulate both sides of the equation. You're just going to have to start working to take this expression and combine it into one. Okay, so we're going to put an equal sign and we're going to start writing down things that are equivalent to the original expression. All right, so here you're basically adding two fractions. So you have to recall from algebra, how do you add fractions? Well, you need a common denominator, okay? So since this is involving trig, you know, it's a little tougher. Remember, if you get stuck when you're adding fractions and you can't figure out what the common denominator should be, all you have to do is multiply the denominators together, okay? So our common denominator here is going to be, take the first denominator, and remember, it's a package deal. It's got two terms, 1 and negative cosine of v. You need to put that in parentheses, okay? And then you need to multiply it by the other denominator. Again, it is a package deal because it has two terms, okay? So this is going to be our common denominator, 1 minus the cosine of v times 1 plus the cosine of v, okay? All right, so what we're going to do here is, I guess I'm going to not work up here. I'm going to just come down here and start jotting things down, okay? So I have 1 over 1 minus the cosine of v plus 1 over 1 plus the cosine of v, okay? So again, we're going to start generating equivalent expressions here, okay? So we know our common denominator. I'm going to work with this first fraction, okay? So I have 1 over 1 minus the cosine of v, okay? I need the denominator to be 1 minus cosine of v times 1 plus the cosine of v, okay? So I am going to have to make that happen, I'm going to have to multiply the bottom by 1 plus the cosine of v, okay? And again, this is going to have to go in parentheses as a result, okay? So in order to make sure that the expression is not changed, since I multiplied the denominator by 1 plus the cosine of v, I'm going to have to do it to the top as well, okay? So essentially what ends up happening, okay, we're really multiplying by 1, okay? You're multiplying by 1 plus the cosine of v over 1 plus the cosine of v. Those two quantities are identical, so they cancel each other out. You're left with a 1. We're really multiplying this 1 over 1 minus cosine of v by 1. So nothing is being changed, okay? All right, so that's the first fraction. Then we need to keep our plus sign in the middle, and we're going to have to do the similar kind of thing to the second fraction, okay? The second fraction is 1 over 1 plus the cosine of v, okay? We would love it if the denominator were 1 minus the cosine of v times 1 plus the cosine of v, okay? So we've got part of it. We've got the 1 plus cosine of v. To make that denominator what it needs to be, we need to multiply the bottom by 1 minus the cosine of v. Okay, if you do that to the bottom, you need to do it to the top so that you do not ultimately change the fraction. Okay, so here you go. Okay, all right, so we have essentially changed both denominators to what they need to be. Okay, and that in turn changes the numerators. Okay, so we did that. All right, so now we are ready to start combining, simplifying, however you want to think about it. Okay, so let's go to this first piece right here on the left. Okay, we are multiplying fractions here. Okay, so let's go ahead and multiply the numerators. Okay, 1 times 1 plus the cosine of v, that's just going to be 1 plus the cosine of v. Okay, I'm going to hold off on multiplying the denominators out for just a second. Okay, so I'm just going to rewrite the denominator. Okay, and then on The second fraction, remember we've got our plus sign in the middle, okay? I'm going to leave the denominators as they are for just a second, okay? If we multiply in the top, 1 times 1 minus the cosine of v, that's going to be 1 minus the cosine of v, okay? All right, so now we're adding two fractions. We still have two different fractions, okay? They have the same denominator. So once you've established that common denominator, you keep that common denominator, okay? And then you add across the top, and that's going to combine these things into one fraction, okay? So let's keep our common denominator, okay? So the common denominator is 1 minus the cosine of v times 1 plus the cosine of v, okay? Again, I haven't multiplied it out yet, okay? And now we're just going to add across the top. So we're going to have 1 plus the cosine of v, that's from the first fraction, and then we're going to keep the sign in the middle, which is plus, okay? Remember, if you were subtracting, you could subtract in the same way. You would just have a minus sign here, okay? Now we need to add the numerator of the other fraction, so 1 minus the cosine of v, okay? All right, so we just start simplifying because now we have combined it into one fraction. That was the whole goal, but we want to simplify, okay? All right, in the numerator, I see a positive cosine of v. It is going to cancel with a negative cosine of v, okay? So in the top, we are left with 1 plus 1, which is 2, okay? And the denominator is 1 minus the cosine of v times 1 plus the cosine of v, okay? You can actually leave it like this because this is a correct answer, okay? You've combined it into one fraction, okay? You did the addition and combined it into one fraction, okay? If you want to simplify further, you can, okay? Again, directions are going to be vague. How far do I have to take this, okay? As long as you do what the directions say and simplify within reason, you're good. Okay, but you could also, if you wanted to multiply out the denominator, you can do that. You're going to have to FOIL. So 1 times 1 is 1, and then do the outer terms. 1 times the cosine of v is positive cosine of v. And then if you did minus, or you did the inner terms, negative cosine of v times 1 is going to be minus cosine of v. And then the last terms, negative cosine of v times positive cosine of v, that's going to be minus cosine squared of v. Okay, you do see that you can further simplify here. Okay, so if you did this, you're going to get a positive cosine of v, a negative one. They cancel. That's going to leave you with 2 over 1 minus the cosine squared of v. Okay, you use your Pythagorean identity here, okay, in the denominator. This is going to be 2 over the sine squared of v, okay? So you can stop there, or if you want to turn this into a cosecant, you can, okay? I'm going to box this saying this is acceptable, okay? You want to go a step further, we know that 1 over secant, or sorry, 1 over sine squared is going to turn into cosecant squared. So this is also 2 cosecant squared of v. Okay, so here are all good answers. Okay, this is another way to write the answer. Okay, all right, so here you go. Okay, we took our original two fractions that we were adding together. Okay, we added them and simplified. Okay, so you know, the simplest way to write the answer is definitely 2 cosecant squared of v. Okay, but again, this is correct. Is not as simplified, but it is correct. Same thing here. Okay, correct. Not as simplified as you can get. Okay, but still correct. All right, let's try another algebraic manipulation that will help us with establishing trigonometric identities.